The white employee kicked over the janitor's bucket until he entered the CEO's office like he owned it. In a sleek, high-rise office buzzing with ambition, an old black man in a janitor's uniform quietly pushes his mop past, laughing in turns. They trip him, mock him, call him names. But they don't know, he's not here to clean their floors. He's here to clean house. For 4 days, Harold Bell takes their abuse in silence. But behind that silence, power, secrets, and a plan. The name they've been waiting for, the chairman, is already in the building. Harold Bell pushed his cleaning cart through the glass doors of Sterling Tech's headquarters, his worn janitor's uniform hanging loosely on his 60-year-old frame. The faded navy fabric, patched at the elbows, bore the stains of years spent scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. His face, weathered but composed, carried a quiet dignity, his dark eyes sharp behind a pair of slightly scratched glasses. He nodded to the receptionist, a young woman who barely looked up from her phone, and made his way to the elevator. The hum of the building's morning bustle surrounded him, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, voices overlapping in hurried conversations. Harold didn't flinch. He'd walked into places like this before, places where his presence was noticed only long enough to be dismissed. The elevator dinged, and he stepped out onto the 12th floor, where the marketing department buzzed with energy. A group of young men stood clustered near a whiteboard, their laughter sharp and careless. Harold pushed his cart toward the glass-walled office, his mop handle creaking slightly. The group's chatter faltered as he entered, their eyes flicking toward him, then away, as if he were a piece of furniture that had momentarily caught their attention. "Morning," Harold said, his voice low and steady, as he began wiping down a conference table. No one responded. He didn't expect them to. He'd learned long ago that silence was often the loudest judgment. One of the men, Brad, a 27-year-old with neatly gelled hair and a crisp white polo, leaned toward his colleague and muttered, "They must be scraping the bottom of the barrel to hire a black janitor." His voice was just loud enough to carry, and the group snickered, their laughter a jagged edge that cut through the air. Harold's hand paused on the rag, his grip tightening, but he kept his face neutral, his eyes focused on the table's surface. Another man, Jack, chimed in, his tone dripping with mockery. "Look at him. He's probably dirtier than the floor. How's he supposed to clean anything?" The group erupted into laughter, louder this time, their voices bouncing off the glass walls. Harold's jaw clenched, a familiar heat rising in his chest. He thought of his wife, Clara, who'd faced the same sneers as a hospital orderly decades ago, her hands raw from cleaning beds while patients whispered about her place. He'd held her through those nights, her tears soaking his shirt. That memory burned now, but Harold kept moving, dipping his mop into the bucket, the water sloshing softly. He didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, he watched. As he moved through the office, emptying trash cans and wiping down windows, his eyes catalogued everything. Brad, the loudest of the group, was sloppy, his desk littered with half-finished reports, his computer screen open to a spreadsheet he hadn't touched in hours. Harold saw him slip a thumb drive into his pocket, muttering about fixing the numbers before a meeting. Jack, meanwhile, hovered near a female colleague, Sarah, making a crude joke about her presentation skills that left her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Harold's lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't just about him. This was a culture, rotten at its core. The morning wore on, and the jabs continued. Brad tossed a crumpled coffee cup toward a trash can, missing it deliberately so it landed near Harold's feet. "Oops," he said, grinning. "You got that, right, old man?" The others laughed, and Harold bent to pick it up, his movements slow, deliberate. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for a reaction, a crack in his composure. He didn't give them one. Instead, he straightened, dropped the cup into his cart, and moved on, his mind racing. He remembered his first job, sweeping floors at a factory while supervisors called him boy, and laughed at his ambition to study engineering. He'd proved them wrong, clawing his way through night school, then corporate ranks, until he sat at the top. But he never forgot the weight of those early days, the way every slight was a test of his endurance. Now, at Sterling Tech, he was testing something else, not himself, but the people around him. By midday, Harold had cleaned half the floor, his cart rattling as he moved from cubicle to cubicle. The marketing team was in a meeting, their voices carrying through the open door. Brad stood at the front, presenting a campaign, his tone confident as he quoted numbers Harold knew were fabricated. He'd seen the real reports in the trash, crumpled and discarded. Harold lingered nearby, wiping a window, his ears tuned to every word. "We hit 120% of our KPI, Brad boasted, and the room nodded, impressed. The manager, a harried man named Tom, scribbled notes, oblivious to the lie. Harold's mop moved in slow, steady strokes, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of his daughter, now a lawyer in Chicago, who'd once asked him why he stayed calm when people treated him like less. Because anger makes you their prisoner, he'd told her. But watching, planning, that makes you free. He was free now, free to observe, to collect the pieces of this broken system. The afternoon brought more of the same. Jack accidentally spilled coffee on the floor near Harold's cart, smirking as he walked away. "Better clean that up quick," he called over his shoulder. Sarah, passing by, hesitated, her eyes meeting Harold's for a moment. She looked like she wanted to say something, but Brad's voice cut through, calling her to a meeting. She hurried off, her shoulders slumped. Harold watched her go, his chest tightening. He'd seen that look before, on his wife, on his daughter, on himself. The look of someone fighting to be seen. As the day ended, Harold stayed late, his cart parked near the conference room. The office was nearly empty, the marketing team gone for the day. He pulled out his old flip phone, its screen cracked, but functional, and began photographing the whiteboards, charts, graphs, KPIs, all the data Brad had twisted for his own gain. Each click of the camera was a small act of defiance, a step toward something bigger. He tucked the phone away, his face calm, but his heart racing with purpose. Brad's words echoed in his mind. They must be scraping the bottom of the barrel to hire a black janitor. Harold's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just Harold. He was Harold Bell, and he'd spent 4 decades climbing through a world that tried to keep him down. Now, he was here, in their midst, seeing them for who they were. He pushed his cart toward the elevator, the wheels squeaking softly. The office lights dimmed behind him, but Harold's resolve burned brighter than ever. He thought of Clara, her strength, her sacrifice. He thought of his daughter, her fight for justice. And he thought of the days ahead, when he'd step out of the shadows and into the light. They thought they knew him. They thought he was nothing. But Harold Bell was a man with a plan, and soon, they'd learn exactly what that meant. Harold Bell pushed his cleaning cart across the 12th floor of Sterling Tech, the wheels squeaking faintly under the weight of his worn janitor's uniform. The navy fabric clung to his 60-year-old frame, patched at the elbows, a silent badge of the labor he'd endured for 4 days. His glasses, scratched but functional, sat low on his nose as he mopped the floor, his movements steady, but his mind sharp, cataloging every slight, every whisper. The marketing team's laughter still echoed in his ears from day one, Brad's sneer about hiring a black janitor, Jack's cruel jab about his skin being dirtier than the floor. Harold had swallowed it all, his face a mask of calm, but the fire in his chest burned hotter with each passing hour. It was Thursday, and the office hummed with the usual chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, voices overlapping in self-important chatter. Harold moved silently, emptying trash cans, wiping down desks, his eyes scanning the room. He noticed Brad slipping a thumb drive into his pocket again, muttering about tweaking the numbers before a meeting. He saw Jack lean too close to Sarah, a female colleague, his tone mocking as he criticized her latest campaign pitch. Sarah's face flushed, her hands fidgeting, but she said nothing. Harold's grip tightened on his mop handle. He knew that silence, the kind that came from being worn down, from knowing no one would back you up. The morning dragged on, and the jabs grew bolder. Brad tossed a crumpled energy drink can toward Harold's cart, missing the trash bin by inches. "You got that, right, Harold?" he called, his voice dripping with condescension. The others snickered, their laughter a familiar blade. Harold bent to pick up the can, his knees creaking, his mind flashing to his wife, Clara, who'd faced the same sneers as a hospital orderly. "Keep your head high," she told him once, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "They can't take your dignity unless you let them." He straightened, dropped the can into the bin, and moved on, his silence a shield. But the shield cracked, just before lunch. Harold was mopping near the break room, the soapy water sloshing in his bucket, when Jack sauntered by, a coffee cup in hand. Without breaking stride, Jack's foot shot out, kicking the bucket hard. Water spilled across the floor, a grey puddle spreading like a wound. Jack spun around, his face a mock of surprise. "Whoa, Harold, what's this? You left your bucket in the middle of the walkway." "That's a safety hazard, man." Harold froze, the mop handle trembling in his hands. The heat in his chest surged, a wave of fury he hadn't felt in years. He met Jack's gaze, his dark eyes blazing behind his glasses. "You kicked it," he said, his voice low but sharp, each word deliberate. "I saw you. Don't lie." The office went quiet, heads turning, eyes widening. Jack's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly, stepping closer, his tone aggressive. "What did you say, old man? You calling me a liar? Maybe you're just clumsy." He turned to the gathering crowd, Brad, Sarah, a few others, his arms spread as if inviting agreement. "Right? Guy can't even keep a bucket upright." Laughter rippled through the group, sharp and cruel. Brad stepped forward, his grin wide. "Come on, Harold, don't make a scene. Just clean it up. It's what you're here for, isn't it?" The words hit like a slap, and Harold's hands clenched, his nails digging into his palms. He thought of his daughter, now a lawyer, who'd faced the same dismissals in courtrooms, her brilliance overshadowed by prejudice. He'd taught her to fight, to stand tall. Now, it was his turn. "I'm here to do my job," Harold said, his voice rising, steady but laced with steel. "Not to be your scapegoat. You kicked the bucket, Jack. Own it." The crowd shifted, uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Sarah's eyes darted to the floor, her lips pressed tight. Brad laughed louder, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "Oh, he's got some fight in him. Too bad it's not gonna help." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "You're the janitor, Harold. Know your place." The words were a spark to dry tinder. Harold's heart pounded, his pulse a drumbeat of rage and resolve. He wanted to shout, to tear into them, to lay bare every insult he'd endured. But he saw the crowd, their faces unified in their dismissal, and he knew words wouldn't change them. Not yet. He took a breath, forcing the fire down, and knelt to clean the spilled water, his movements slow, deliberate. The crowd dispersed, their laughter fading, but Brad's voice carried one last jab. "Tell your supervisor about this, Harold. That's 3 days' pay gone for screwing up." Harold didn't respond. He mopped up the water, his hands steady, his mind racing. The threat of lost wages stung, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the culture that let this happen, that saw him as less, that thrived on cruelty. He thought of Clara, her hands raw from scrubbing floors, her pride unbroken. He thought of the company he'd built, the battles he'd fought to reach the top. This place, this Sterling Tech, was broken, and he was here to see how deep the rot went. That night, long after the office emptied, Harold stayed behind. His cart sat abandoned near the conference room, where whiteboards displayed the marketing team's latest KPIs, numbers he knew were lies. He pulled out his old flip phone, its screen flickering as he snapped photos of each chart, each graph, each falsified report. The click of the camera was a quiet rebellion, a record of the truth they thought they could hide. He moved carefully, his eyes scanning for security cameras, but the office was lax, its arrogance a blind spot. No one noticed the janitor lingering. No one cared. As he photographed the final board, Harold's mind drifted to his daughter's words, spoken over a phone call last week. "You don't have to do this, Dad. You've already won." But this wasn't about winning. It was about justice, about exposing what hid behind polished desks and fake smiles. He tucked the phone into his pocket, his face calm, but his heart burning with purpose. He'd endured their laughter, their cruelty, their lies. But tomorrow, they'd face the truth. Harold pushed his cart to the elevator, the squeak of the wheels the only sound in the silent office. His uniform felt heavier now, weighted with the week's indignities, but his steps were firm. He wasn't just a janitor. He was Harold Bell, a man who'd spent a lifetime proving people wrong. And tomorrow, he'd show them exactly who they'd underestimated. Friday morning arrived with a sharpness that Harold Bell felt in his bones. The weight of 4 days at Sterling Tech, of mopping floors, enduring sneers, and swallowing rage, pressed against him as he adjusted the cuffs of his crisp, white dress shirt. He'd swapped his worn janitor's uniform for a tailored black vest, the fabric smooth against his 60-year-old frame. His scratched glasses, now polished, caught the faint light as he stepped into the elevator, his heart steady, but his mind ablaze with purpose. Today, the mask would come off. Today, they would see him. At 8 a.m., an email pinged across Sterling Tech's servers, its subject line stark, "Chairman's visit." Harold, still in his janitor's uniform for the early shift, was wiping down a whiteboard when the notification hit. The office erupted into a flurry of whispers and hurried footsteps. Employees scrambled to tidy desks, check reports, and rehearse talking points. Harold kept his head down, his mop moving in slow, deliberate strokes, but his ears caught every word. Brad, the marketing team's golden boy, leaned against a cubicle, his gelled hair gleaming as he scoffed to Jack. "Chairman Harold Bell. What kind of name is that for a big shot? Bet he's some old geezer who still reads paper newspapers." The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Harold's hand tightened on the mop handle, his pulse quickening. He thought of his wife, Clara, who'd faced the same dismissive arrogance from hospital administrators, her competence buried under their assumptions. He thought of his daughter, fighting the same battles in courtrooms. The fire in his chest flared, but he kept mopping, his face a mask of calm. Brad turned, catching Harold's eye, and his smirk twisted into a scowl. "What are you staring at, old man?" he snapped, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Heard the chairman's coming at 9. Why don't you focus on your job, instead of eavesdropping?" He stepped closer, his tone venomous. "Or do you need another bucket to knock over to keep you busy?" The jab hit hard, a reminder of yesterday's humiliation, when Jack had kicked over Harold's bucket and the team had laughed, blaming him, threatening his pay. Harold met Brad's gaze, his dark eyes steady, unflinching. "I heard," he said, his voice low, measured. "I'll be ready." The words carried a weight Brad didn't catch, but Jack, standing nearby, snickered, clapping Brad on the shoulder. Yeah, Harold, make sure the floors sparkle for the big boss. It's all you're good for. Harold didn't respond. He turned back to his mop, the water sloshing softly, but his mind was racing. He'd spent 4 days watching this team, Brad's falsified KPIs, Jack's cruelty, the way they dismissed Sarah and anyone who didn't fit their mold. He'd photographed their lies, recorded their words in his mind, and now, he was ready to show them who they'd underestimated. By 8:45, Harold had slipped away to a supply closet, where he changed into his vest and dress shirt, the transformation quiet, but deliberate. He tucked his janitor's uniform into a bag, adjusted his glasses, and checked his old flip phone. The photos of the whiteboards, proof of Brad's fraud, were still there, a silent weapon he'd wield when the time was right. He took a breath, steadying himself, and thought of Clara's words. Don't just fight, Harold. Change things. Today, he would. At 9 o'clock sharp, the main lobby was packed, employees standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces a mix of nerves and anticipation. Tom, the branch manager, stood near the front, his tie slightly askew, his clipboard clutched like a shield. Sarah hovered near the back, her eyes darting nervously. Brad and Jack stood together, their laughter subdued but their confidence unshaken, as if the chairman's visit was just another chance to shine. The elevator dinged, and the room fell silent. Harold stepped out, his black vest impeccable, his white shirt crisp, his posture commanding. Heads turned, eyes widened, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone's coffee cup slipped, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Brad's smirk vanished, his face paling as if he'd seen a ghost. Jack's mouth hung open, his hands frozen mid-gesture. Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition mixed with disbelief. Harold walked to the front, his steps measured, his presence filling the space. Tom, flustered, stammered a greeting, but Harold raised a hand, silencing him. He turned to the crowd, his dark eyes sweeping over every face, lingering just a moment on Brad and Jack. Then he spoke, his voice deep, resonant, cutting through the stunned hush. Good morning, he said, his tone calm but unyielding. I'm Harold Bell, chairman of the board of Sterling Tech's parent company. For the past 4 days, I've been here, not as your chairman, but as your janitor. I've mopped your floors, emptied your trash, and listened to how you treat someone you think is beneath you. The room was a graveyard of silence, every breath held, every eye locked on him. Brad shifted, his hands clenching, his face a mask of panic. Jack stared at the floor, his bravado gone. Harold's gaze moved to Sarah, who looked back with a mix of awe and shame, and he softened slightly, but only for a moment. I've heard your words, he continued, his voice growing sharper. I've seen your actions. The lies about KPIs. The mockery of colleagues. The way you dismiss anyone who doesn't look like you, act like you, or fit your idea of worth. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I came here to see what kind of company I'm running. And what I found is a culture that thrives on prejudice and deceit. A memory surged, Clara, coming home from a double shift, her hands trembling as she recounted a doctor's sneer. Stick to cleaning, Clara. Harold had held her, his own anger mirrored in her tears. That same anger burned now, but he channeled it into his words, not his fists. I could be furious, he said, his voice steady but fierce. I could fire every one of you who laughed when a bucket was kicked over, who called me old man, who assumed I was less because of my skin or my uniform. But anger doesn't fix what's broken. He stepped forward, his presence commanding every inch of the room. I'm not here to tear you down. I'm here to build something better. A company where respect isn't a privilege, where talent isn't judged by appearance, where no one is reduced to a stereotype. His eyes locked on Brad, then Jack, their faces pale, their confidence shattered. You've shown me who you are. Now, I'll show you who I am. Harold nodded to Tom, who looked like he might faint, and stepped back. The crowd remained frozen, their whispers dead, their arrogance stripped away. Sarah's eyes glistened, a faint nod signaling something like gratitude. Brad tried to speak, his voice a weak croak, but Harold didn't acknowledge him. He'd said enough. As the meeting adjourned, employees filed out, their heads bowed, their voices hushed. Harold lingered, his vest a stark contrast to the janitor's uniform he'd worn hours ago. He pulled out his phone, the photos of the whiteboards a quiet reminder of the evidence he held. He thought of Clara, her strength, her sacrifices. He thought of his daughter, fighting her own battles. This was for them, for everyone who'd been dismissed, degraded, unseen. Harold adjusted his glasses and walked toward the elevator, his steps firm. He wasn't just the chairman. He was Harold Bell, a man who'd spent a lifetime proving the world wrong. And now, he was ready to change it. The silence in Sterling Tech's lobby was suffocating, a heavy fog of shock and shame that clung to every employee. Harold Bell stood at the front, his black vest impeccable, his white dress shirt crisp against his 60-year-old frame. His scratched glasses gleamed faintly as he surveyed the crowd, his dark eyes sharp, unyielding. The revelation of his true identity, chairman of the board, not the janitor they'd mocked for 4 days, had stripped the room of its arrogance. Brad's face was ashen, his gelled hair no longer a crown of confidence. Jack stood rigid, his hands clenched, his bravado shattered. Sarah's eyes glistened with something like relief, while Tom, the branch manager, gripped his clipboard so tightly his knuckles whitened. Harold's words from moments ago still hung in the air. "I've been your janitor. I've seen who you are." Now, it was time to act. Brad broke the silence, his voice a weak, trembling attempt at levity. "Mr. Bell. I was just kidding, you know. All that stuff, it was just a joke." His smile was forced, his eyes darting nervously, searching for an ally in the crowd. No one met his gaze. Jack shifted uncomfortably beside him, his usual smirk replaced by a grimace, as if he could feel the ground crumbling beneath him. Harold didn't look at Brad. His eyes locked onto Tom, the manager, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his stare. "Tom," Harold said, his voice low but commanding, "I've spent 4 days observing this team, how it operates, how it treats its people, how it builds its culture. Or, rather, how it fails to." He reached into his vest pocket, and pulled out a slim folder, its pages marked with notes from his old flip phone's photos and his meticulous memory. He placed it on the table with a deliberate thud. "This is what I found." Tom's hands trembled as he opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first page, a detailed summary of falsified KPIs, timestamps, and names. Harold's voice cut through the tension. "Brad, you're done here. Effective immediately. You've been falsifying reports, inflating numbers to cover your incompetence. Worse, you've fostered a culture of discrimination, mocking colleagues based on their race, their gender, their position. You've belittled Sarah for her work, laughed at me for my skin, assumed I was less because I held a mop. That's not a joke. That's a violation of everything this company should stand for." Brad's mouth opened, but no words came. His face flushed red, then drained to a sickly pale. I didn't mean," he stammered, but Harold raised a hand, silencing him with a look that carried the weight of decades spent overcoming men just like him. "You meant it," Harold said, his tone sharp but controlled. "Every word. Every laugh. You meant to degrade, to dismiss, to keep people in their place. But your place is no longer here." He nodded to security, who stepped forward, their faces impassive. "Escort him out." The crowd parted as Brad was led away, his shoulders slumped, his confidence shattered. A few employees whispered, but most stayed silent, their eyes fixed on Harold. He turned to Jack, who flinched under his gaze. "Jack," Harold said, his voice steady but laced with steel, "you're not off the hook. Kicking over my bucket, blaming me, mocking me in front of your team, that's not leadership. That's cowardice. You're formally reprimanded, and you'll lose half a month's pay. Consider yourself lucky it's not more. One more incident, and you're gone." Jack's face burned, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He nodded, a jerky motion, his eyes fixed on the floor. Harold let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. He thought of Clara, his wife, who'd faced the same cruelty in her hospital days, her dignity tested by those who saw her as less. He thought of his daughter, fighting in courtrooms against men like Brad and Jack, her brilliance dismissed until she forced them to see her. This moment was for them, for every person who'd been pushed down and kept silent. Harold turned to Tom, his voice softening but no less firm. "Tom, you're the manager here. You let this happen. You let a culture of lies and prejudice fester under your watch. You saw me mopping floors, taking insults, and did nothing. That's not leadership. That's negligence." Tom's clipboard slipped from his hands, clattering to the floor. He stammered, "Mr. Bell, I didn't know it was you." "You shouldn't have to know," Harold snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "You should care about every person in this building, whether they're the chairman or the janitor. You failed, Tom. You'll keep your job, but you'll undergo mandatory training on workplace equity, and I expect a detailed plan by next week on how you'll fix this mess." "Understood." Tom nodded, his face pale, his hands trembling as he retrieved his clipboard. Harold's gaze swept the room, meeting every eye that dared to look back. Sarah stood near the back, her expression a mix of awe and gratitude, her hands no longer fidgeting. She gave a small nod, and Harold returned it, a silent acknowledgement of her resilience. "This isn't just about punishment," Harold said, his voice steady again, resonant with purpose. "It's about change. Effective immediately, Sterling Tech will implement mandatory training on diversity, equity, and inclusion for every employee. Discrimination, racial, gender, or otherwise, will result in immediate consequences, no exceptions. We're also revising our reporting systems to ensure transparency. No more fudged numbers, no more lies. This company will be a place where talent is judged by work, not by skin or status." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Success doesn't come from where you stand," he said, his voice low but powerful. "It comes from how you treat the person you think is standing below you. I've spent 4 days as your janitor, and I've seen who you are when you think no one's watching. Now, you'll see who I am." The crowd remained silent, the weight of his words pressing against them. Harold thought of the photos on his phone, the falsified KPIs, the evidence of Brad's deceit. He thought of the bucket incident, the laughter, the threat of lost wages. He thought of Clara, her hands raw from scrubbing floors, her pride unbroken. He thought of his daughter, her voice fierce as she'd told him, "Change it, Dad. Don't just fight." This was his change, his stand, his legacy. He nodded to Vanessa, the head of communications, who'd been scribbling notes, her face a mix of respect and shock. "Draft an announcement," he said. "Send it out today. Every employee needs to know where we stand and what we expect." Vanessa nodded, her pen moving faster. Harold turned to the crowd one last time. "You're dismissed," he said, his voice final. "Get back to work. And do better." Employees filed out, their whispers subdued, their heads bowed. Sarah lingered, her eyes meeting Harold's for a moment. "Thank you," she mouthed, her voice too soft to carry. Harold nodded, a faint smile breaking through his stern demeanor. He'd seen her struggle, her silence, and he knew this was for her, too. As the room emptied, Harold stood alone, his folder of evidence tucked under his arm. He adjusted his glasses, the vest feeling lighter now, as if the weight of the week had lifted. He thought of the future, of the training sessions, the new policies, the culture he'd demand. He thought of Clara, who'd be proud, and his daughter, who'd carry this fight forward. He wasn't just the chairman. He was Harold Bell, a man who'd walked through their fire and come out ready to rebuild. He walked to the elevator, his steps firm, his white shirt catching the light. The doors closed, and for the first time in days, Harold allowed himself a deep, steady breath. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory was his. He'd shown them who he was, and now, he'd show them what Sterling Tech could be. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts or opinions about this story, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel to support us. Your support means the world. Thank you again.